Okay, we'll get it going. I've recorded this and we'll be using it for our public record as well as notes that Alan will be taking. So good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Brown. We'll be opening up the workshop on January 13th, 2022 at 10 a.m. related to the changes, our proposed new regulations in NAC Chapter 555. We'll call the meeting to order and we'll do introductions since there's not too many of us. I'll let staff introduce themselves and then our public. So for the record, my name is Megan Brown. I'm the Deputy Administrator for the Plant Health and Compliance Division within the Nevada Department of Agriculture. Jeff?
Hi, for the record, my name is Jeff Knight. I'm the state entomologist for the Nevada Department of Agriculture.
Thanks, Jeff. Allen Whiteneck is the administrative assistant. He doesn't have a mic or a camera, but will be taking notes and works in the Plant Health and Compliance Division. Amber? Amber also might be having technical challenges. She also works for the Nevada Department of Agriculture and supervises and administrates the public information and education elements of the department. And then Casey.
Good morning, Casey, State Forester Fire Warden for the Nevada Division of Forestry, and in here with me is Ryan Shane, Deputy Administrator for the Nevada Division of Forestry.
Good morning.
Great. Thanks, Casey. So we'll start the meeting with public comment. So those that have, which is, I don't see anybody on the phone either. So I'll open it up to public comments. Actually, I'll review the agenda first. We will go through public comment. I will then go over the proposed changes to Chapter 554, and then we'll go back to public comment. So I'll open it up to public comment. People have an opportunity to provide any public comment. It's 3 minutes per person unless those that don't use it, I can use a reserved time for the speaker that's allocated. Do we have any public comment before we move into the proposed changes? All right, seeing no public comment, I will move to the third item in the agenda, which is an overview of the proposed changes. The proposed changes were provided on our NDA website, but I'm also going to share my screen and go over those proposed changes with you in an overview sense, and then if there's questions we can go through there. So this is a proposed change to proposed addition to NAC 554 related to firewood quarantine. This is new language is to address quarantine and to for relating to the spread of exotic wood destroying pests and from other parts of the United States that may potentially threaten the wildland and urban forests of Nevada. So the basic structure of the proposed language I'll go through, and then I'll go into more detail. So we talk about the authority and purpose, which I just went over. There's the basic definitions, areas under quarantine, any restrictions, labeling requirements, import and treatment of wood, the records that are required, any exemptions, the enforcement powers from the department, and any violations and penalties. So again, the purpose of the regulation is to prevent the movement of invasive insects transported by firewood, including but not limited to all quarantinable organisms. The definition is obviously the department. The definition of firewood, and I won't go through every single part, but I think some of these are of note and of interest to the public. So the definition of firewood means any unprocessed kindling, logs, timber, or other portions of a tree or any species cut or split or intended to be cut, split into the form and size appropriate for the fuel of fires in an open pit, grill, fireplace, stove, or other wood burning furnaces or devices in any form commonly used for burning in campfire stoves or fireplaces. Invasive insects means any non-native organism that may have cause or that cause economic or environmental harm and are capable of spreading into new areas within the state. Areas under quarantine are all areas in the United States and Canada that are declared high risk by the department, and the department will keep an updated list of these quarantine areas and will be available. Any restrictions, all firewood offered, exposed, or held for sale in the state shall be labeled in accordance with the labeling requirements further in this section. And a person may not transfer, offer, expose, or hold for sale firewood under quarantine in the area unless the firewood has been treated in accordance. So the labeling requirements are need to be clear and need to include these following elements. So the quantity, weight, or measure or count, the name and address, the packer and the distributor, the origin, and then each bulk sale form may be and should be accompanied by a delivery ticket that would be available with the information of the seller and broker, and that information needs to be the same. So it's the weight, the date, the quantity, and if there's any delineations within the bulk load, so the price, and if there was a different delivery than or a different quantity than was named delivery or in the delivery. So the next section is related to importation and treatment. So all firewood all firewood shall be prohibited entry into Nevada from an area under quarantine unless the required certification is produced. So the certification, again, is issued by an authorized agent within this agricultural official within the state of origin, and the certificate should have the name, address, inspection, certification date, signature, and it confirms that the treatment procedures which are listed below have been followed. And these, I'm not going to go into exact detail because it's fairly lengthy, but these specific treatment procedures are quite common across the West and are standard, and we try to work to keep them as standard with our other neighboring states so that distributors would be able to have consistency for the different areas that they're distributing. Records and certifications and other documents of a person who transports or supplies firewood other than the person shall use the include information regarding the source of firewood and treatment. The records should be available to us if we request. The exemptions are firewood harvested in areas that, in other areas that are not under quarantine or exempted for treatment, and the department will issue those. Requests for exemption can be made meeting these criteria and would be submitted to the department, and they would be valid for up to 12 months. The enforcement powers, authorized agents of the department shall refuse admittance into Nevada any firewood that does not meet the provisions in quarantine. Any shipment found in Nevada in violation of this quarantine shall be treated to comply with the quarantine or destroyed or be returned to the exporter, and the buyer shall submit a plan for the effective disposal to the department. Any violations and penalties, which is the last section of this proposed regulation, is any fraudulent use or incorrect information. Any intended movement of firewood under the quarantine is a violation, and failure to give advance notice of the import or failure to comply with the provisions. The violations of the quarantine shall be subject to civil penalties of not more than $5,000 per violation, and each improperly labeled, transported, or treated package of bulk shall be a separate violation under this rule. So that's an overview of the proposed new NAC regulations related to firewood quarantine. And now I need to figure out how to stop sharing because I've never used this before, so please bear with me. So we will now move to the fourth agenda item, which is again back to public comment. So please provide any public comment related to the proposed NAC 554, and I will open it up for public comment.
Megan,
Yes.
Ryan does have a question. Can we ask the question in public
Yes.
comment, or do you want us to wait? Okay, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead.
Megan, the way that the regulation is currently drafted, does it only subject forest products or firewood from out of state coming into the state, or does it also regulate in-state, intrastate transfer or transportation of firewood if that was coming from a quarantine zone inside of Nevada?
Jeff, would you like to respond?
Yeah, no, it doesn't address movement of firewood within the state, but we have currently, at least, we have no areas that would be under quarantine for any of these pests or any of the quarantinable pests in Nevada. So it really doesn't. We don't. I mean, if you're looking at, are we going to restrict movement of bark beetle infested or wood that's infested with native bark beetles to some other part of the state? No, that's that would fall under something totally differently, and it's usually not, excuse me, it's usually not done. So, I mean, we have interstate quarantines sometimes, but this one won't cover that.
So Jeff, just to clarify quickly, this is Casey again. Does that mean, though, if we did have a quarantine area within the state, this would regulate that, or it would not?
Well, it would be able to regulate it, I think. Megan, step in, because all we would have to do in our list of quarantine areas that will be, if you will, attached to this, yeah, you could put, say, the area south of the whatever latitude, longitude, or Clark County in Nevada, or Elko County in Nevada. You could add that to the quarantine. I mean, that would be basically right now what the western states are really concerned about is primarily things east of the Rockies. That's where all the high level quarantine pests would be coming from. So, I mean, in the enforcement side of it, if somebody saw a load of firewood driving across, one of our ag enforcement guys or one of our plant industry or inspectors, what are we, quarantining something now, Megan? Quarantine and plant health inspectors, they could technically stop and the inspectors don't have that authority, but the AEOs, the ag enforcement officers, could stop a vehicle and say, okay, where's the wood coming from? Do you have all the necessary documents, etc.? They probably would not stop any in-state truck that was carrying a load of firewood, or a trailer of firewood. But out of state, that's probably the directive that we will give them in their training is if you see something coming in, especially if it's from east of the Rockies, you'll stop and ask for all this stuff. That goes a little bit beyond your question, but I guess the basic answer to your question is, yeah, I think we could include, if we were to have a quarantine in Nevada, we could include that into and we could use this to enforce it, the movement of the wood.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And
Actually, probably under that circumstance, there would be an entirely different quarantine written up. You know, I was just thinking about, we would probably do an internal quarantine on that area and specifically cite what could be, you know, essentially very, very similar along the lines of this one. So I think that's probably the route we would take. That's kind of the route we've taken with things like citrus psyllid and stuff like that. So.
okay, thanks, Jeff. And you invited Megan to jump in, and I want to leave that opportunity open. Megan, if you had something to add, and if not, I have a follow-up question.
Okay, yeah, I don't have anything to add, but we can definitely make sure to get clarification through LCB and or the DAG's office related to that question as well, and can loop back with the division.
Okay, that would be appreciated. Just want to know the scope of it, if it's just interstate or if it's both intra and interstate. And Jeff's interpretation at this point says it's both.
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah, whatever legal team says, it would be nice to know their interpretation. Then the follow-up question is, obviously I have concerns about intrastate restrictions on woody biomass utilization and because that facilitates our wildfire risk reduction activities and such. So to the degree we can, we're trying to solve bottlenecks, not create them. And so that's kind of where my questioning is coming from. But anyway, so my follow-up question is, when you establish a quarantine zone in Nevada, or the federal government does, because you link your process to theirs, some of the pests, and most of them are host specific. So say emerald ash borer, if we get an infestation of that insect in a urban forest setting, is your quarantine zone going to specify the agent causing the quarantine and also the host species of wood that would carry those, so that the quarantine zone was subject only to those environments and wood products that are related to the organism that's initiating the quarantine zone?
Jeff, would you like to respond?
Yeah, yes, under that circumstance, that would be exactly kind of what I was saying at the very end of my comment. We would set up, if we were to get emerald ash borer or Asian longhorn beetle, one of these, and I could go down the list, we would set up a separate quarantine. Well, the way it would first work is essentially we'd go in and delimit the infestation, and then decide if it was something that was that we could eradicate with the methods available. And during that time, we would have set up at least a temporary quarantine to prevent the movement of it. And that quarantine would, yes, list the species of insect or pest, and the commodities or species of trees in this case, or shrubs possibly even, that would be potential carriers of the pest. And that quarantine would then basically supersede anything in this Firewood one.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Does that help, Ryan?
Very much, very comforting. I guess the biggest concern with that particular question is drawing a big loop across a landscape and tying up wood products and utilization for a greater breadth of species, hosts, landscapes than is really scientifically required to achieve the goals of the quarantine zone. So
No,
I appreciate that.
that's the whole purpose of the delimiting survey. And you know, when we do those kind of things, that's what the delimiting survey A helps set up the area that we're going to need to quarantine, and B, give us the information as to whether or not this is something we're going to be able to eradicate. If you remember Mediterranean pine engraver down in Las Vegas, when we found it, we started looking further for it. And once we had determined that basically within, you know, a couple months of finding it, we determined that it was basically all over the place in southern Nevada. That kind of cut out any kind of, and with also the information coming from California that, you know, this isn't something you can eradicate. So that's a kind of the basis on how we deal with these things.
Very good information. Thank you very much.
You bet. Anytime.
Casey or Ryan, do you have any other comments? I'm checking the list to see if we have any additional public comment or callers. Do you guys have anything else?
No, we don't. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, I appreciate everyone's time related to this workshop. A recording of this will be taken in notes, and I also made note, Ryan, to follow up regarding your question of intra versus inter, and we'll work to get you some clarification regarding that. Thank you for your time today and participating in our workshop related to the proposed regulations in NAC 554, and I will close the meeting.